So, David Ehrlichman, talk about structure without capture. Really, that is how we can be decentralized and still have the structures we need to get shit done, right? Because decentralized work really can work. In my career, the past 12 years, helped create all kinds of different purpose-driven networks, these kind of decentralized coalitions of organizations that were working together across sectors to address big complex issues that they couldn't on their own. Like, how do you steward 1 million acres of land that's owned and managed by all different kinds of organizations and government agencies? Have to do that collectively. How do you protect migrant rights across international borders? So I've seen a lot of these examples of decentralized networks, decentralized organizations that have really worked and achieved things that centralized entities can't on their own, and I wrote about it in the book Impact Networks, which came out in 2021. But DAOs, like so many networks, so many decentralized organizations, really aren't fulfilling the potential for the most part. Why is that? One of the biggest reasons I see is this, that the centralized organizations in general, and DAOs specifically, don't have a good way of delegating and revoking roles, responsibilities, and authorities to get things done. And they don't have the accountability mechanisms that are necessary to actually hold people accountable to following through. Right? Currently, only top-down hierarchical organizations are good at this. And so many DAOs end up either LARPing as a decentralized network, but they're really controlled just by a few individuals or whales or a small group, or they kind of wallow in this tyranny of structurelessness, unable to get things done with any level of coherence and consistency. And we do need structure to get things done. But the question is, how can we have structure in decentralized, capture-resistant ways? There's been a lot of talk in this space and today about the importance of voting delegation for good DAO governance. I'm talking here about good operational delegation. And this is one of the most important issues that I see in this space, and it's why I've spent the last 2 years building HATS protocol, along with fellow co-founders Ninti Nick and Spencer Graham from Raid Guild and DAO House and other stuff. We're building a platform for a backbone for decentralized work. It's a protocol for role and authority delegation, and I'll dig into a little bit why I think that's a key piece of solving this issue. So what is really getting in the way of DAOs fulfilling their potential? We think of it as the tragedy of the responsibility commons. What is a responsibility commons? Whenever people are coordinating to do something, a bunch of things come up that need to get done. When it's not clear who's responsible to take those things on, they fall into a responsibility commons. Right. In hierarchies, people usually have really clear roles and responsibilities, and so it's obvious or very clear who should take on specific responsibilities, or if it's not, somebody higher in the hierarchy delegates that responsibility to someone and then or a team and holds them accountable to following through. But for decentralized networks, where networks of agents, where nobody has explicit power over anybody else, they don't have a good way of people claiming responsibilities, making sure the right people are claiming those responsibilities, delegating responsibilities, and actually making sure people are following through when they do claim responsibilities. So that leads to the tragedy of the responsibility commons, and it's a big reason why DAOs are largely less effective than traditional top-down hierarchies. And so to think about how this is an issue, what's getting in the way, we need to look at how we're organizing. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of hierarchies, the pros and cons of networks, how we can solve the tragedy of the responsibility commons, and then some examples of the solution in practice. So hierarchies. Hierarchies are not bad. They're actually the dominant organizing structure in the world over the last few thousand years for a reason. They're really good at getting stuff done in complicated domains, when it's clear what needs to get done and you can actually plan things out in advance and assign or delegate specific roles to follow through, right? So some pros of hierarchies. People generally have very clear responsibilities and roles. It's easy to delegate responsibilities to people because there's somebody higher in the hierarchy who has that authority. They are predictable and stable, so they can scale pretty well. That's really good in complicated domains, again, where you can plan things out in advance, kind of building a bridge from point A to point B. But in complex domains where things are constantly changing, you don't know what the right answer is. You kind of have to learn your way through it, or as the saying goes, cross the river by feeling the stones. That that stability actually has some restrictions. It creates bottlenecks where information can't always flow exactly where it needs to flow. There are some critical actors where if they're removed, the structure is not resilient, and they're slow to adapt, right? That there's stability, and the other side of the coin is slow to adapt when changes are necessary. And probably most importantly, in my opinion, is because of the high concentration of power in hierarchies, certain individuals or groups at the top have entrenched structural advantages over others, right? So they have entrenched structural advantages over those lower in the hierarchy. This perpetuates inequities, and it stops people lower in the hierarchy from engaging fully because they're not actually really benefiting from the value that the hierarchy is producing proportional to their effort. The people at the top who have entrenched structural advantage kind of end up being like a black hole, right? They're sucking more value and resources out of the system proportional to than the value they're putting in, especially over time after the thing has already been established. So this is a big reason why we've seen this widespread shift from top-down rigid hierarchies to more decentralized ways of working. But networks, these network structures, also have pros and cons. Networks are actually pretty good at engaging in complex domains where there's a need to combine diverse perspectives, kind of tap into the wisdom of the crowd, bring people together from across the system who are seeing different parts of the issue. They are pretty resilient and adaptive because they're not dependent on any single hub at the middle. And because they're more decentralized, they're more capture resistant. So this is why network structures, DAOs have taken network structures to do things like govern shared resources or do collective stewardship of public goods. That's what I think DAOs are really best suited for, right? Collective stewardship of public goods, collectively owned resources. However, as networks scale, as DAOs scale, they run into some similar challenges. There's often a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. They are largely ineffective at holding people accountable because there isn't that power over structure. And it's often unclear how to actually delegate and especially how to revoke authority back from people when they're not following through. This is the tragedy of responsibility commons, right, in a nutshell. And so how do we solve this issue? You could probably guess by now, based on what I've been talking about. We need to be able to delegate roles and responsibilities clearly in a nuanced way down to the level of the individual, not just at a group level. We need to be able to provide the necessary authorities and permissions, both hard and soft authorities, that people need to follow through on those roles and responsibilities, and also need to hold them accountable, being able to revoke those authorities if necessary, if they're not actually following through. Again, currently hierarchies are the only ones who are good at this. So how can we create structure without capture? How can we do this in decentralized ways? Structure without capture is how can we provide the structures we need while still holding capture-resistant organizations, right, where we don't have those entrenched power over structures where people at the top are extracting disproportionate amount of resources over others. Another way of thinking of this is how do we give people the power to do things on behalf of the collective without creating entrenched power over structures across the whole organization, right? How do we create finite hierarchical structures that are really good at execution within a collectively governed whole? That's the goal here, I think. And so we can blend the best of what networks and hierarchies have to offer. We can bring in the resilience and the capture resistance of networks and introduce the implementation chops of hierarchies. So again, how do we create these fit-for-purpose, finite hierarchical structures within a collectively governed whole? And I'll show you some examples of what that could look like in practice. So let's imagine a DAO, network, any kind of collective wanted to organize a grants program. So they would delegate that response, rather than having every DAO member vote on what the grants are, which could be really inefficient. People don't have the right context. They could delegate that authority to a specific grants committee, grants team, and actually give that grants team signing authority on a multi-sig that's owned by the DAO, give them access to certain resources, give them the ability to vote on certain snapshot proposals, right, where only members of that team have the authority to do so. But then the team would probably recognize that it'd be helpful to delegate authority further down to the level of the individual. So they identify the need for specific grants champions who can oversee the work of the grantees, whether those grantees are individuals or teams or other DAOs, and hold them accountable to actually following through on the milestones they identified in their grant proposal, and give those grantees the hard and soft authorities they actually need to do that work, giving them access to the right Discord channels or Telegram channels, communication channels, the right Notion documents or Google documents or documents that are owned by the collective, or access to the right private GitHub repos. So here we have a structure that is built fit for purpose. It will go away when it's no longer needed. It spans both internal to the DAO. People in the box here, you can imagine, are DAO members. These external folks are external to the DAO. They're contractors or grantees. So the structure is both internal and external. And it has all the ingredients of what we need to solve the tragedy of the responsibility commons. Roles and responsibilities are clearly delegated. People know what they're supposed to be doing. And there's an explicit agreement between the individual or the group and the DAO of what they're responsible for. They're given the authorities they need to do their work, and those authorities can be revoked by the collective, because here, yes, this is a finite hierarchical structure, but the top of the hierarchy is the DAO. It's the collective, right? So there's no individuals at the top who can capture the organizational structure here. So fit for purpose hierarchy within the context of a collectively governed whole. The DAO is kind of the root of the authority tree here. So if the grantees are not following through, their authority could be revoked by the grants champions, whose authority, if they're not doing a good job, could be revoked by the grants committee. And if the grants committee is not doing a good job, its authority could be revoked by the DAO as a whole. And you could imagine kind of multiple grants committees that were all competing around how do we provide the best grants program and make the best decisions around grants. And so you can imagine kind of multiple grants teams that the DAO would delegate authority to. Maybe it starts small, and then the ones that actually show they do a good job of allocating resources then get more resources to allocate in future seasons. Right? So this is kind of like staking your reputation on being a good grant distributor from one season to the next. Another example, let's say a DAO saw the need to organize an event here at ETHCC. So it would delegate authority to a project team and then actually give that project team signing authority for a safe multi-sig that has some resources in it. The DAO owns the multi-sig, but they can delegate signing authority to the members of the team to make transactions for the resources that are in that multi-sig. Again, would delegate further, most likely. The team would recognize the need for like an operations wizard who's holding everything together and give them maybe a discretionary budget, so they could give them separate signing keys for another discretionary fund, and the ability to post to social media on the team's behalf. This is a huge issue that comes up a lot. How does a DAO give certain people the ability to post to Twitter on the collective's behalf while still ensuring that you can revoke that authority later, rather than giving the person the password to the Twitter and then they can blackmail the DAO, which we've actually seen, right? Or post shit that's crazy and they have real power over the DAO. So I can give that authority and then revoke it later. And that operations wizard might also have the authority to oversee the work of external contractors like a caterer or a logistics person and give them the authority they need to be in the right Discord communication channels or DAO communication channels so they can stay up to date on everything. Again, we have a fit-for-purpose structure, spans internal and external to the DAO. The DAO as a whole is at the top of this structure or the root of the authority tree, so it's capture resistant. Authorities, roles and responsibilities are delegated, authorities are delegated, but they can also be revoked. One more quick example, dispute arbitration process. Let's say two members of a DAO were for and against a certain argument, green and red. To hold them accountable that this is actually a good use of attention or the DAO's time, you could have them stake into some contract that then opens up the case. Meanwhile, the DAO has identified and delegated authority to a group of arbitrators who are qualified to make decisions on disputes like this. To hold them accountable, they could also, in addition to being able to revoke their arbitration hat, you could also have them stake into some contract that then gives them the authority to vote in a snapshot poll that makes the decision around different disputes. So again, it's kind of these are different structural Legos that DAOs can attach onto their organization that gives them certain capabilities they didn't have before, but they're entirely capture resistant because the DAO is at the top of this hierarchy or the root of the authority tree here. So these are just three of like many different types of structure Legos you can imagine, right? Grants program, project team, dispute arbitration we talked about. But we see guilds and holacratic circles and stewardship council, recognized delegates, authorized representatives. So how can a DAO give certain individuals or teams the ability to vote on the DAO's behalf in a voting vault, say, or in snapshot proposals? They could actually delegate their votes to a specific individual or even delegate their votes to do cross-chain voting. This is what I mean by structure without capture, right? Structure to get things done, but it's capture resistant. And this is what's going to solve the tragedy of the responsibility commons. And just a few words on HATS. This is what we're trying to build with HATS. HATS is a protocol for role and authority delegation. It's aimed to be a backbone for decentralized work. HATS themselves are kind of specialized 1155 compatible NFTs that come with the roles and the responsibilities that the person is agreeing to or the team is agreeing to. So it can be worn by an EOA or a multi-sig or a committee or even a DAO as a whole. And by holding this hat token, or by wearing the hat, as we call it, it will give people, through token gating, the access to the right Discord role and communication channels, voting power and weight through snapshot, the ability to create snapshot proposals, multi-sig signing authority. So wearing a hat or holding that HATS token actually gives people the ability to sign on a multi-sig, which can then be revoked later. Read-write access on all kinds of workspaces and documents, and even compensation. Wearing a hat or holding this token, owning a wallet that you could have a super fluid funding stream go to the wallet so that the wallet is actually attached to the role, not to the soul, right? It's about hats, not heads, roles, not souls. So creating structures of roles in our organizations where the roles can be passed from one address to another or one person to another. It's a structure of roles rather than a structure of people, which means it can compose in lots of different ways. And then these hats can be kind of pieced together to fulfill any one of the structure Legos I mentioned before, or to actually provide structure for an entire organization like this. And super stoked to share that we just launched V2 of our app, which is a huge upgrade on Thursday. This is a screenshot from it, so go check that out. It's only available on desktop right now, but you can see that at app.hatsprotocol.xyz. So that's what I had for you today. If you're curious about exploring HATS, using it, getting involved, check out hatsprotocol.xyz and send us a note, or you can reach out to me directly on Telegram or everywhere else at Dave Ehrlichman. All right, cheers, y'all. Thanks. Happy to do any questions.
Yeah, just one question regarding the technical part of all these tools. So we already realized all the communication interactions we have. It looks like the DAO builder or the tools for DAO builder.
It's kind of like the infrastructure layer. So the hat is, token gates have two parts, token and a gate, right? We rely on existing gates that are provided either through gating platforms like Guild or Collabland or Lit Protocol, or kind of native token gating through Charmverse or whatever else. And then hat is the token. So it's kind of like a specialized token factory that represents a role, responsibilities, and then unlocks those abilities through token gating. But we've also built other types of modules like Hat Signer Gate, which gives the wearer of a particular hat or the holder of that HATS token signing authority on a multi-sig or ownership over an individual wallet or other things.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's not like a on-chain construction. So what's first? I mean the tooling. So I'm ready to account and the client can go to the HATS protocol and create my own wallet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All the ecosystem that you have in functionality and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the protocol is open source, and we aim for the protocol itself to be collectively governed by a DAO in the future, and then we have built an app on top of the protocol to make it really easy to use. But our hope is to create an ecosystem of different apps and platforms that are built on top of the same protocol.
We have quite interesting idea we are calling it our protocol, we are calling it experts, but here it's like the different types of the DAOs which are responsible for some sort of stuff inside the system. So it's great and definitely the way out of what we have right now. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
When you were talking about networks, you were going through like kind of pros and cons of hierarchies of networks, and the networks were capture resistant was one of the benefits, but in one of the negatives was like kind of lack of coherence. So can you speak more to the anti-resistant properties of networks? Because in a way, like I think you've seen like in the theory of responsibility commons, a network without structure actually is not very capture resistant,
right?
Or at least not.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think networks have the potential to be capture resistant, but they're not inherently capture resistant. To Justice's presentation earlier, when it's just like a social community, certain people can have disproportionate amount of influence over that community, and there's power is always present, right? And so when there aren't kind of agreements or mechanisms baked into the network, then it can be captured by individuals. But I think the nature of sort of the decentralization of networks means they have the potential to be capture resistant if you have those types of agreements or mechanisms built in. Yeah, that's a good point. And I have some hats. Thank you all for I don't have enough for everybody, but if you will actually wear a hat, or if you actually are interested in using hats, I'd be happy to give you a hats hat, because you're the special people who showed up to my talk. So thank you. Cheers.